Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange podcast presented by Rush Truck Sales of Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy, and on today's episode, we welcome back James Menzies, who's the editor of today's Trucking and Trucking News. James, welcome back.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so we're continuing with our tradition of kind of seeing what we got right, what we got wrong. But I think this year has been a lot calmer than last year. I think we were way off last year when we did this half year in review, but we want to do an overview of kind of where we are in 23 so far so that we bring you back in, kind of get your feedback. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What have you been writing about? And what's kind of state of the industry as a whole as we are, approaching the halfway part of 23. So I guess we'll start off where we normally start off. Kind of the leading indicator of most of the industry is like the trailer side. What are you seeing in that part of it?
It's amazing how quickly things change in this industry, isn't it? Yes. Last time we were talking, freight was going gangbusters and everyone was raking in record profits, and that certainly is not the story today.
Correct.
But, for trailer manufacturers and truck manufacturers as well, they may have the opportunity to kind of sail right through this slowdown because there was so much pent-up demand. Trailers right now, manufacturers are sold out for the year, and they're hesitant to start taking orders for 2024 just because they're still a little bit uncertain as to what the input costs are going to be on those trailers and how difficult it will be to get parts. The good news is it sounds from the manufacturers like it's improving.
That's good.
They are getting parts more easily. Some of those price increases that we saw going through the roof have leveled off, if not come back. At least they've leveled off. And fleets are starting to get the trailers that they've ordered, so they're starting to refresh the fleet, which of course is great for safety and efficiency for those fleets. A lot of them were extending the life of the trailers any way they could.
Right.
And some of them were becoming de facto trailer manufacturers themselves and rebuilding units just to keep them on the road for a little while. So I think there's a little less desperation there on the trailer side, which is good. And for the trailer manufacturers themselves, they continue to be busy just because of that pent-up demand.
Yeah, no, good point. And we're starting to see, and we'll touch Class 8 and medium duty in a second, but we're starting to see that too as an OEM, even on the truck side, is you're not getting those crazy delays like you used to, right? So things are getting delayed. Stuff's still out. The lead time is, I agree, it's about a year. Like if you're to order kind of anything at this point, it's probably a minimum of a year to get something built to spec for you. But anything that's kind of on order, I agree, is rolling in. It doesn't seem to be getting delayed as much as it used to. It was constant, right? And then, the surcharges seem to have calmed down as well. So I think everything's leveled out that way. But to your point, I think a lot of the OEMs we're seeing for 24 pricing haven't really locked in anything yet because nothing's too sure. And, as we roll and say to the Class 8 side, I think a large part of that on the Class 8 side is really the what is Carbon Act doing with regards to emissions and what are the OEMs going to have to meet in order to be able to sell equipment in 24, and then how do you price that, right? So, for Class 8, I guess that's part of what we see. But what are you hearing again on the Class 8 side?
Yeah, much the same. And it's interesting to hear what you're saying because you're on the front lines as a dealer. And the same thing. People are finally getting those orders that they've been waiting on for so long, and they're refreshing their fleet to where they want it to be, which of course drives down operating costs. So trucks are coming in. We were at ExpoCam just a few weeks ago, and talked to some of the dealers there and some of the manufacturers that had corporate people there, and they were all saying the same thing. They haven't seen this mass wave of cancellations that everyone was worried about when the industry slowed down. So the demand is steady, and it's pent up, and the Class 8 trucks are virtually sold out through the year, and then we'll see what 2024 brings. But there seems to be a thinking that there's going to be a healthy appetite for new trucks in 2024 as well. So if this is certainly a freight recession, but if it is a broader recession, it's really hard to, depends on how you define it. It's not so bad for truck and trailer manufacturers.
Agreed. And I what we're seeing, I think that pent-up demand kind of hides that recession piece, right? So you're going to have, fleets that couldn't get, if they replace 50 trucks a year, for example, they get 30, right? So they still they're behind, right? Or they extended their maintenance cycles. They normally replace every 3 years. Now they moved it to 5. Well, they'd like to bring that back. So there's still, even if the market is soft, there's still a demand for them to replenish some of their fleet for stuff they couldn't get, right? And obviously you get to the smaller fleets, guys, 1 or 2 trucks, they couldn't get anything for the last couple of years. And usually those guys run trucks a lot longer, right? They're not replenishing every 4 to 5 years. They're traditionally running those things for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And now that truck you wanted to run for 8 years is now 11 years old, and it's killing you in maintenance because the thing's it's just old, right? Yeah. That's just so, but you haven't been able to get one for 3 years. So even if the market is soft, they still need a truck to run their business, even if the business isn't, running at 100% capacity kind of thing. So,
and fleets might come out of this looking a lot different than they traditionally did because they were doing everything they could do to get trucks, including straying outside their traditional normal OEM suppliers and dealers. So
yes,
you might see that some manufacturers have made some interesting conquests, or that you have some fleets that were traditionally one brand that now have a mix of brands. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah, and we've definitely seen that from our side. Customers that maybe were exclusive to what we do, by the nature of just availability, had to go outside of one brand, right, and get other ones involved. But even from a spec point of view, sometimes it's like I normally run this spec. It's like, okay, well, here's what I have. Fine, I'll take it. It's 80% of what I need. It'll still move freight. It's just maybe it's whatever the setup is. But you're gonna have some really the fleets that normally have a very unique kind of unified. Visibility out there may look a little different over the next few years as things kind of cycle through their fleet, right? For that reason.
Fleet buyers like what they like, and they like what they're familiar with. So they've had to step outside their comfort zone a little bit, and it will be interesting. There might be some, they might have discovered some new suppliers or some new technologies that they hadn't been familiar with before.
Yeah, and part of it came back to the parts availability, right? Hey, normally they run with a certain type of wheel or a certain type of something in the vehicle. Well, that's not available. You had to put you into something else, right? Or try a totally different product because that's how this vehicle is going to come. So it's changed a lot of that for everyone, right? And even the buying process, normally it's a traditional buying cycle. Okay, you put out a tender in the beginning of the year, close it out after a couple of months for trucks to arrive, 3 to 4 months later. Well, like that hasn't happened in about 3 years, right? So even the procurement cycle has thrown a lot of these guys off, unfortunately. Right now, it's kind of sometimes us coming to them and saying, I have 10 of these. Do you want them? Right, kind of.
And are they generally saying yes, please?
I think most guys have taken them, what they can take, as long as it fits within their wheelhouse. But not many have shied away because it's kind of like, this is what we have. Right. The problem is that they're popping up at times that don't meet their buying cycle. Right, a lot of companies are they're publicly traded companies. They have certain criteria they have to meet, and it's just not landing in the budget time. Like, yes, I know I need the 10, but I don't have my budget till October, and you're asking me in May, and I won't have approval till October, right? Yeah. But I have to make a decision. So there's been a lot of those parts that puts them in a tough spot, but most of them have been nimble where they can, and they've found ways to kind of talk to their senior management or to the board and say, look, not how we like to run, but here's how we have to do it to keep the fleet going. Otherwise, we're going to be we're going to be behind the 8 ball from a maintenance point of view.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the trucking industry, you see a lot of versatility, a lot of rolling with the punches. It's not something that they're not accustomed to, so they're able to adapt pretty well.
Yeah, and in medium duty, very similar, I think, to Class 8. I don't think there's too much difference of what's out there, of what you're seeing.
No, very similar. What's interesting in medium duty, of course, we're starting to see the penetration of some electric vehicles.
Yes,
I know you've got the EMV. I got a chance to drive that, and it's a lot of fun. They're a fun truck to drive, and it's a great segment for electrification. It's a great way for fleets to sort of dip their toe in to see what to expect, see what they need from charging infrastructure standpoint and whatnot. So medium duty, I think the most interesting news there is just the fact that electrification is here.
Yeah.
There's a full range of trucks out there that are available. Typically, those duty cycles lend themselves well to electrification. So I think that's the most exciting thing on the medium duty side right now.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think from an EV technology point of view, that's where it's hitting, right? The final mile, stay home or stay close to home, inner city runs, something under 200, 250 kilometers seems to be kind of where that sweet spot is especially the battery electric vehicle side. And I think because the charging infrastructure isn't where we need it to be, say across, a province or across the country, then you are kind of tied to coming home every night. Right. So I think that's what we're seeing. And a lot of different manufacturers, some Canadian manufacturers. Obviously, we have 3 product lines that will have EV technology. 2 are at market. 1 is coming hopefully next year. So everyone's kind of getting on board, which is nice to see. But yeah, it tends to be that medium duty or a little bit, the smaller, class 5, 6 vehicles and smaller where I think the sweet spot is for this technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting back to ExpoCam, every show we have now, there are more EVs on the floor. And these are commercially available trucks. A few years ago, they were concept trucks, and that's no longer the case. No,
and it's a fast-changing technology too, right? Yeah. Like I know I've seen some demo stuff of stuff that we have coming out, but it's not going to be, in market till next year. And I bet it'll change 5 times before then, in like a 6-7 month period. Just technology is so fast. The battery chemistry is changing. The technology for the chargers are always kind of evolving and changing. So it's, and a lot of questions we get from some of the customers is, how do I know like this is the right time to get in, right? Because it's going to change so fast. And, the answer is no matter where you hop in, it's going to keep changing. So you kind of pick a time that works for you and your fleet, and you invest in that part of it, and you grow off of that. And then in 5 to 7 years, it might be something different, or it might just be a version of what you already have. kind of like going back to computers back in the day, right? They changed so fast, right? But at some point you get in, and you just kind of, you roll with it.
I think, the good thing to do is to get in before you have to get in.
Yes.
Don't wait until they're mandated. You get some experience now and get the infrastructure set up, because from all the fleets that have taken the plunge that we talk to, the one common message we hear is that, it takes longer than you would think to get that charging infrastructure set up.
Yeah. And we've talked about that with some other episodes where the truck is really the easiest part of the whole thing. Right. In all fairness, it's probably the easiest thing to wrap your head around. It's easy to learn, and you can get it fairly quickly. The infrastructure part, everything that leads up to it is really the challenge, right? Is can you get that power into your location? What's the cost to do it? How much work do you have to do it? And how quick can you get permits, electricians, everything done? So, you could have a truck in 4 or 5 months, but it may take you 18 months to get the infrastructure in.
Right.
Right.
And the OEMs have done a really good job at providing more than just a truck.
Yes.
They can provide the expertise to get that infrastructure set up and to help you understand what duty cycles you should deploy these trucks in. So I encourage fleets, lean on your OEM experts, because they're the ones that can really guide you through the whole process.
Agreed. And they've usually partnered with some sort of, charging company to at least help get you somewhere. And those companies usually have tie-in with infrastructure, municipalities, whatever it is you need. So you're not alone, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I agree with you. The OEMs have done a good job of partnering and trying to get in front of that too and say, hey, there's more to than just a truck that we want you to be involved with. There's a whole process leading up to that really needs to happen.
There's a whole ecosystem. And interesting, you say you're not alone. And what I find really encouraging too is that fleets that have some experience with this are not hesitant to share what they've learned along the way. So, we've had conferences and shows and whatnot where fleets will share their own experiences and help others understand what the realities are of putting this technology into place.
Well, it helps. And I even see that from the OEMs, they've all, other than one manufacturer, have agreed on a charging system as far as, what plug to use, right? So little things like that just, I think, everyone's kind of learned together. And I think behind the scenes, there's a lot of movement between all the OEMs as far as, brain power, guys go from one place to another. So, it's very evolving, but you're starting to see some gelling as far as, how do we work together to make this thing grow? Because you need that infrastructure piece and lessons learned from early adopters to really fine tune and make it, available to the masses.
Yeah, and I think in Europe we've seen OEMs working together to build out the charging infrastructure, because all of their customers are going to need these chargers.
Right.
And you don't want the 6 different sets of chargers or 6 different plugs. So I think it's encouraging that they're working together, because if we're going to get there on the timeline the government set for us, we need cooperation.
Yeah, agreed. And, so from the EV side, you kind of go back to the, our normal stuff. And we had seen previously some challenges in the supply chain and getting parts and availability. And I think going back to what we talked about on the trailer side and the Class 8, I think that's calmed down. It hasn't gone away by any means. There's still constraints I think we're finding, but it seems to be manageable constraints, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing as well. And again, it's good to hear you say that, because you guys are fighting that battle every single day. Mm-hmm. Supply chain has eased. We think of it as in terms of parts and trucks and trailers and whatnot, but also think about it in terms of how difficult was it to get a bicycle.
Yeah,
everything was in short supply. Everything was backed up, and that seems have been eased a lot. Now you've got warehouses that are full,
right?
And that's the problem. That's affecting freight, because a lot of retailers have stocked up. They filled their warehouses, and then the economy slowed a little bit. People started spending their money on experiences and travel and dining out instead of goods.
Right.
So now you've got full warehouses, and you don't always have the right types of inventory in those warehouses. So we've got to work through that inventory supply. Otherwise, freight is going to continue to be subdued, because right now warehouses are full of stuff that people haven't bought and may not want to buy. So that's got to work itself through the system.
Yeah, a good point. And I think part of driving that too, you're starting to see the freight and the spot market, the numbers come down a bit. And as far as, like you said before, a year and a half ago, things were through the roof. Guys were buying trucks left, right, and center just to catch that wave. But I think the wave has kind of crashed a little bit.
It has. The spot market has been decimated in terms of volumes and especially in terms of rates. And we've seen, especially in the U.S., where they do a lot better job of tracking these numbers, we saw record numbers of new trucking company formations over the last couple of years chasing that spot market freight. Now we're seeing a lot of those disappear. I don't think they're absolutely disappearing. I think they're going back and leasing back on with bigger carriers, so they have the stability and the contract freight, which hasn't been hit as hard as a spot market. Or they're selling the truck, and right now there's still lots of demand for used trucks. True. And then going back as company drivers. So I don't think there's this huge exodus of capacity from the industry, but it looks like there's a shift of capacity from these one truck operators out there chasing that hot spot market back to leasing on with fleets or becoming company drivers. So really, it's a tale of two different markets out there for fleets right now. You got the spot market, which has just been brutal, and then you have contract rates, which have held up pretty well, because shippers learned over the last couple of years how important it is to have capacity when you need it and to have those strong relationships with customers. So those rates have been fairly sticky. So the carriers that are reliant mostly on contract freight have been doing pretty well.
Right.
And those that have been chasing the spot market have been suffering a great deal.
And that kind of leads into I guess, a hot topic here in Canada with regards to, I guess, how you acquire drivers in your fleet. There's definitely two models that are kind of at play, and I think you had a pretty good piece on the newer emerging market. And there's opinions on both sides, and I think everyone has their view of it. But overall, from an industry point of view, what's the overall takeaway from both sides of what's out there currently?
Well, there's a war. There's a war underway right now when you talk about this term driver Inc., which was coined by the Canadian Trucking Alliance. You've got your legacy carriers that have a traditional employment model with their drivers, and then you have a lot of newer carriers in Canada, specifically in Ontario, although it's spreading. At ExpoCam, again, talking about ExpoCam, Quebec fleets are all of a sudden starting to feel it.
Interesting.
Because as freight has softened a little bit here, Ontario fleets that are built on this so-called driver Inc. model are starting to expand into Quebec. We're even hearing about it now in the United States. It's got a different term, but it's popping up. And basically, the gist of it is, they'll blur the lines a little bit about the status of the driver and have them incorporate and treat them a lot like an owner-operator, except for they don't actually own the truck.
Gotcha.
They're driving company equipment, and they're not paying for their own fuel. They're not paying their own insurance and whatnot. So, it's a gig economy, and it's not just in trucking. It's in landscaping, it's in construction, hairstylists. I mean, it's all over the place. And it's a new way of work. It's a new way people want to work. And it's really a struggle because, you can realistically question, are all those taxes being paid? Are all those deductions being made? Chances are they're not. Otherwise, there would be no advantage.
Good point.
And allegedly, there's a 20 to 30% cost advantage to fleets that operate under the driver Inc. model. So there's been very little enforcement, and there's been very little clarity from government as to whether there will be enforcement, and that has caused this battle within the industry between those who think that it's okay to operate this way and those who don't.
Yeah.
And I don't see a quick end to it because government's been meeting with both sides, and I think has been telling both sides what they want to hear, and we're really not seeing a whole lot of action on the ground in terms of doing anything about it. So I think at the very least, the government owes the industry clarity. So if it's okay, if there's never going to be an enforcement and it's okay with you, fine, let everyone do it.
Yeah.
But the traditional carriers don't want to go down that path, knowing that it's not right.
Right.
So it's going to be that's the story of the year, I think, for 2023, specifically in Ontario. But as I say, it's expanding. Now, Quebec is really concerned about it. The United States is seeing their first cases of something similar to driver Inc. So it's I think, the story of the year, and I don't know how it's going to play out, to be honest with you.
Fair. It's funny. It seems like we just got e-logs kind of up and running to help kind of, neutralize all the companies. Everyone's playing fair, for lack of better words. And then all of a sudden this kind of now is taking over that, from an industry point of view, you got everyone on the same level playing foot. And now, it's different again.
Right.
So,
and remember speed limiters?
Yeah.
Way back in 2005, it was the same thing. It was the same battle with the small fleets not wanting to have to use speed limiters. The big fleets were already using them and wanted them to be used by everyone to even the playing field. So it seems there's always something.
I agree. I think the government needs to just get some clarity so that everyone knows where they stand, and you can run your business and plan your business accordingly so that you're competitive, right? Because obviously, to your point, there's a cost advantage to one model. So your operating costs are significantly lower one model versus the other, and that's going to reflect in rates and business you can attract. So to be, for the market to be fair and be competitive, you need to have kind of a level playing field. So hopefully, maybe this year or into next year, we get some clarity as regards to, how that's going to look for the industry. I
think we'll have to, because there's two very organized lobbies now on the other side of the issue.
Good point.
And I think that they're going to force some kind of resolution.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So I guess that leads into our outlook for the second half of 23. I think we covered most of it, but I guess from a general overview, what do you think the rest of this year might look like? I
think we're going to see mergers and acquisitions really ramp up because valuations were crazy over the last couple of years. Correct. Because fleets were making record profits. That's no longer the case for most smaller operators. And those valuations have come back to earth. Meanwhile, you have the big traditional buyers of the world that are sitting on lots of cash.
Right.
So they're in a good position to make acquisitions. And we've already seen a couple in recent weeks, but I think there's going to be a lot more to come. Also because of the challenging market conditions that tend to have more of an impact on the smaller fleets. And those are the ones that can typically be picked up in some kind of acquisition. So I think we're going to see a lot of M&A as the year goes on. As Alain Bedard, the head of Transforce, likes to say, you buy on bad news and you sell on good news.
There you go.
There's lots of bad news out there right now.
Fair.
So I think we'll see lots of M&A as the year continues on. Drivers, for the most part, they got some good increases over the last couple of years, and I think those have stuck. So drivers are doing okay, which is good to know, good to hear. I talked to an accountant friend that specializes in owner-operators and small fleets, and he says they've never made more money than they have the last couple of years. Now the conditions aren't as strong, but still, at least those pay increases tend to stick. So it's not a bad time to be a driver. There's still lots of demand for drivers. The big fleets that they give their outlooks because they're publicly traded say they expect some strengthening towards the end of the year, but not anything drastic. And there's just so many unanswered questions. I mean, you got right now, in the United States, there's political uncertainty. There's a conflict throughout the world. There's just so much that can happen that can throw the economy askew, at a minute. So, we didn't predict that we'd be here 6 months ago, and I think it's very difficult to say with any certainty where we're going to be 6 months from now. Agreed.
But good point. Like I said, but with the market the way it is, mergers and acquisitions, I agree, could be a leading trend for the second half of the year because the evaluations were through the roof because everyone thought, their product was worth everything, their fleet was worth everything because you couldn't get anything. But obviously now, as things are available and markets have kind of softened a bit, it's probably back to more realistic number to take a look at. So
yeah, it feels like the industry is normalizing, and fleets have finally, as we said before, have gotten some of those new trucks and trailers that they were waiting on. So they've been able to refresh their fleet, get back to sort of a more normal trade cycle.
Yeah,
and I think that we're just seeing a normalization through the rest of the year. Hopefully, not too high, not too low, and maybe just give everyone a chance to take a breather.
Agreed. No, good point. Well, we'll touch base in December and see how right we were on that one.
Yeah.
So excellent. Well, hey, look, thank you for coming in today and giving us an update of kind of where we are so far and an outlook of where we might be headed. So I appreciate you coming in and taking time.
Thank you, Jason. Always nice to catch up.
Excellent. All right. Well, that concludes today's episode. I want to thank James from Today's Trucking for joining us. To catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. And until next time, thanks for listening.